We're so pleased to have our friend Roshi Nancy MUJO Baker as our guest today. And many of you know Nancy. Nancy is a Dharma successor of Bernie Glassman, and in the White Plum lineage of Maezumi Roshi, and the head teacher at the No Traces Sangha in New York City. Nancy's also been a professor of philosophy at Sarah Lawrence. And Nancy, just so you know, I am reading your book, specializing in Wittgenstein. So, and I mentioned the book, and I don't want to be a shameless salesman here, but rush right out and buy this book. I'll just say that. Nancy and I were talking just a few minutes ago, and I mentioned that I think this book will, if it hasn't already, will very quickly become required reading for practice centers, for students looking to take the Buddha's precepts in the Jukai ceremony. It's just a wonderful introduction to that. And in fact, Roshi Enkyo Ohara said this. She said, "This is the guide we have always needed." And I'm about halfway through it, and I can confirm that. So, I highly recommend Opening to Oneness is what it's called. It's under the Shambhala imprint. So,
okay.
And if everyone other than Nancy could please mute. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and pass over to Nancy. And once again, thank you so much for being here and giving us your time and sharing your teaching with us today. So it's thank you, Nancy.
So, hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever, wherever you are. I will say, add one thing about the book, and that is, I hope it's not just for people going through the Jukai ceremony, receiving the precepts, but anybody who's interested in what it might mean to lead an ethical life. And of course, that's most human beings, or at least it used to be. So I did make some notes here just to give some structure to this talk, and then I hope to really open it up to you all. And so I'm going to sort of tell you about the book, which is to tell you something about the precepts. So, and the moral and ethical, I had to look up the distinction between moral and ethical. And the term moral is, about our lives and our actions and our behavior, which may be a function of the culture in which we live or all kinds of things. But ethical, of course, refers to a set of precepts, if you will. It involves things like right, wrong, should not, good, bad, etc. And I just want to say that even though Zen and every tradition that I can tell so far has a non-dual version of ethical life, which is to say, a dual version is we have these precepts and they're over here and I'm here and I follow them or I adhere to them and they're separate from me. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is incredibly important in human life. But Zen, and that's what I'll stick to here primarily, it's a non-dual tradition. So it urges us to, maybe one might say, become one with a precept, and such that it arises naturally out of who we are, and not of being a function of my making a choice in a certain circumstance about what's the right thing to do here. So the way the precepts were taught to me, and perhaps this still happens in Zen communities, is that there's sort of three levels. The first being absolute in the small a sense of never ever kill, never ever steal, etc. And the killing example always used in my day many years ago were the Jains, who wear a mask to keep from inhaling the microbes and thus killing the microbes in the air. So it's like never killing anything, even that which is we can't even see because it's so small. So this is, in our culture, which is not Jain, we see people like that and we think of them as being sort of rigid in their, that I would never X. And the problem with that, of course, is that I then don't want other people, I want everybody else to be the way I am. So I would judge myself harshly for failing to adhere to a precept in a very rigid sense. And then, of course, I judge everybody else as well. And we do know people like that. And then we have, and we do have a word in English, which is that people are like that are moralistic, different from being moral or ethical. But most of the world lives in the sort of second level, if you will, of precept life, of ethical life, which is a level where context is really important. And so depending on the concept, the context, I might decide to do X or Y or not Y or not X. And of course, the wonderful example there is, can't think of his name, it will come, who stole from the rich to give to the poor. So sometimes doing the don't version of a precept depends on the context. In either of these cases, the sort of rigidly absolute sense or the contextual relative sense of a precept, there's separation between me and the precept. So it's a dualistic kind of thing. And again, nothing wrong with this. This is terribly important for human life. But the traditions sort of push us further into a non-dual perspective. And I think this is connected with a very interesting question of where do there's something universal about some of this: stealing, killing, lying, being angry, that there's a universality that goes cross-culturally. And one of the big questions is, where do these precepts come from? And in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have the 10 Commandments, which come from God, given to Moses. And the non-dual version would be to be one with God. And then the precept arises naturally, whichever one it is. So I have in the book on page 15, Confucius said, at 70, I could follow what my heart desired without transgressing what was right. Namely, the heart had come to a place where the what should we call it, where the correct way of behaving, and I know we need to change that language, emerges naturally. St. Augustine said, once for all, then, a short precept is given thee, love God and do what thou wilt. And then there's a Christian poet, mystic Angelus Silesius, man, if you live in God and die to your own will, how simple it will be his precepts to fulfill. And then Meister Eckhart, the great Christian mystic, who of all the Christian mystics has the most in common with Zen. Meister Eckhart, the great Christian philosopher mystic, you must penetrate and transcend all the virtues and should take virtue only in the ground where it is one with the divine nature. So the divine nature is, in Zen terms, is what we call the absolute with a capital A, Buddha nature, the oneness. There are many words in the Zen tradition. So the Zen version of what I've just read is from Dogen. When we sit zazen, what precept is not observed? It's automatic. And of course, by zazen, he didn't mean just sitting on the cushion, but to be in that state of zazen, which is, you know, for Dogen is enlightenment, basically. So the precepts in the Soto sect, which Dogen is seen to be the originator of, come down to us not as don't, or don't kill, don't lie, don't steal, or not killing, not lying, not stealing, but rather non-lying, non-killing, non-stealing. And as I say in the book, you know, this was always a mystery because I remember when I learned the precepts, studied the precepts, it was, well, you people, you're just beginners, so this would be to be in the absolute, and you don't know what that is really, so we'll just leave it at that. And of course, this was at a time when there was a lot of transgressing of the precepts among those who apparently had had some big special experience, so it was a little puzzling. But I was saying to Jeff, I realized that I'm a clarity junkie once when I heard somebody use that term. But I'm also, it's almost, it's my nature. I can't say it's not pleasurable to not understand. And then the pleasure comes in, aha, you know. So what the hell is this non-killing, non-lying, you know? So that's always been with me. And I think I you know, these precept essays, which were originally Dharma talks, they were published, most of them were published by Tricycle magazine. And somebody recommended that I think about making a book, but I wasn't long enough. So I happened at the same time to be just personally immersing myself in a very deep inquiry into Dogen. And having been a trained academic philosopher was a help. But that's where I said, oh, I'm going to start understanding this. So the book addresses three things. And the first thing is to really ask what's meant by stealing, for example. Is it we think of stealing money or stealing someone else's property. And for any of you who've studied the precepts, it's easy to ignore some of them. You say, well, I don't kill anybody and I don't steal. I do lie, misuse of intoxicants or sexuality or being angry. Yeah, okay, I can relate to that. So what are some of the other things that we steal? Well, it turns out we steal attention. There's something called identity theft that's rampant now in this world in which we live. We can steal water, electricity. In California, of course, now poor California is, I don't know what's happening, but a lot. But in places where there's drought and people were initially not supposed to water their lawns, some people would figure out a way to do this at night. And of course, they're stealing from everybody else. They're stealing water. They're stealing water that could be used to drink. We could steal from other people a view, building something in front of somebody's view or erecting a fence or whatever. We could steal the beauty of nature. I spend every July up in New Hampshire in a very beautiful part of the White Mountains, and I rent this damp little place in a forest. And so I walk in the forest every day on a dirt road. And, sometimes there are beer cans and I don't know what else. It's just astonishing. And I have one friend whose family's been there for generations, and she picks all this stuff up every day. She takes a paper bag a plastic bag and goes around. So that's stealing from someone else's pleasure. And then we steal from the future. Why don't we just relax and wait till such and such happens? We get anxious, we worry, we want it to hurry up. Think about hurrying. And that's basically stealing from the present. We steal from the past. We have this expression, which is useful, I think, for Zen people. Let bygones be bygones. Look, they're gone. Let them be. I don't have to. And they're not going to disappear. So I dreamed up a bumper sticker once that said, have a past, but don't let it have you. And, when we have a past that we're carrying around with us and not letting it lie where it belongs, it's finished. We're, in a sense, stealing. And in the book, I even mentioned, or in that essay on stealing, grave robbing, which is really terrible. It just always has struck me as a really awful thing. Imagine stealing from the dead. Anyway, so this is one of the main things in the first half of the book about those essays, which is how do we extend the meaning of these words so that they become alive for us in precisely the way each of us needs? I may steal I may, in doing the work of the, reading, studying the precept and doing the exercises, which come at the end of each one of the essays and later in the book, each one of the chapters. It's, I may discover things about myself. And I may thought, gee, I never thought of myself as stealing whatever it is. And it's really quite striking to extend the meanings or the possibilities of what steal, and the word works perfectly well. And I invite the reader to really do this on his or her own, to maybe find something that works better for you, or that I hadn't thought of for a way of what I call extending the meaning. So this is the first main thing of the three that the book does. The second is doing exercises with others. So it's getting in touch with all the ways that each one of us steals and lies and kills and so on and so forth. So the exercises are basically simple repeating questions where two people, 10 minutes each, somebody asks, tell me a way you steal, asked over and over again. And without any crosstalk, and the person answering it just, the repetition at some point just sort of throws you off track, so that something opens up that hadn't occurred to you before. Some kind of insight, like, oh, I never thought of that. But I think the other really important part of these exercises, and what I would say is the second purpose of the book, is to be able to expose oneself, to stop self-protecting, to stop hiding. Even from myself, we hide things, or even from ourselves, we hide things. By doing this with another person, or even with a whole group. And I'm really very impressed with how powerful that kind of exercise is. I mean, as I say in the book, Zen students are often open up with a teacher and that's it, and there's a certain kind of self-protection going on outside of that private situation. It's a challenge. It takes courage, but once you get into it, people start really looking forward to it. And the other interesting thing that can happen to people doing these exercises is a sense of oneness, if you will, with your partner in doing the exercise. There can be these moments when the openness, the lack of self-protection, and the refraining from crosstalk on the part of the questioner, both have, in a sense, let go of some veneer, some pattern, something, and there can be just a moment of oneness, if you will. So in a sense, the precept essays and the exercises are not, well, how can I be good? How can I be a better Zen student, or whatever one's version is, and practice with the precepts? This is doing the opposite. This is saying, well, hang on a second, we're not there yet. How can you, who are you as a liar or killer? It's like, well, I never thought of it that way. But this is really crucial it is the one main requirement for arriving at the non-place with the precept in question, at the automatic place of its coming out naturally of the non-dual place. And we all have moments like this. And I always think of the experience of standing on a street corner when somebody's about to, this applies to compassion as well, about to step out into the traffic, not seeing that, and you quickly put your arm out or you grab the person. There's no thought about this. And then another big example in the book was in New Zealand when a serial killer just devastated a mosque and killed, I can't remember how many people. And a woman drove her car into the parking lot just as she didn't know what was going on at all, just as two men coming towards her bleeding to death. And she didn't turn around and get the hell out of there. She jumped out of her car and grabbed one of these men and dragged him into the car and saved his life. And unfortunately, the other one died. And as is so typical of situations like this, when she was interviewed by the whatever news media was involved here and called a hero, she said, no, I just did what the way Bernie Glassman always described the bodhisattva is the bodhisattva does what's needed. And that's how she never heard of a bodhisattva, but she said, I just did what was needed. I wish I could have done more, she said. But there was no decision on her part, no figuring out the right thing to do, no answer to the question, why did you do that? There's no answer in that oneness. There's none. This is very common. We all have moments like that, especially in an emergency. Bernie Glassman used to, I don't know whether he got it from Maezumi Roshi, but he said, if my left hand's burning, my right hand doesn't say, oh, gee, I don't know if I should get burned. It's an automatic thing because it's one body. And the other really silly one that he had was if somebody hands money to you and the left hand takes it, the right hand doesn't try to steal it from the left hand. It's absurd. And at that level of awakened oneness, seeing the oneness of everything, being part of the oneness, these kinds of behaviors are not stealing, are automatic. And there's no reference, why'd you do that? Well, I just did. I always mention Meister Eckhart, this is called living without a why. Zen is full of this. My philosopher Wittgenstein is full of this. And Meister Eckhart's version is, a man is asked, well, why do you eat a particular thing? And he says, because it's it makes me healthy, I feel better. Why do you, make it a modern day version, why do you cut your lawn? Well, because, so all these questions are because. And then you get to, he says, why do you love God? And we could say, why do you love the Dharma? Well, I don't know. I just do. And then he asks him, why are you alive? And he said, I don't know. I mean, there is no way to answer that question with a because. And he says, but I'm glad to be alive. This is non-duality. This is the oneness. This is without a why, without a because. And so the precepts can flow out of us in that same way, where I'm not separate from a precept, choosing the right thing to do, paying attention to the context. Well, if it were this, or, and where I might answer the question because it was the right thing to do, or because stealing is wrong. Well, it isn't always wrong, you know. But even, you know, Robin Hood is the person whose name I could think of. And it's like, why, Robin Hood, why are you stealing? And, you know, because it's the right thing to do. These people are taking money from the poor. So living with whys, with because is part of our regular, everyday, relative, whatever you want to call it, lives. And it's important. But there are those moments when even stealing from the rich and giving to the poor just happens automatically. I mean, walking down the street in New York with a homeless person asking for a handout, and then there are many of them. Sometimes people could say to themselves, well, this is the right thing to do, and reach in and hand whoever it is some money. Or it's just automatic. And this is what true compassion is. Compassion is not about sharing the feelings of the other. It's what's needed right away in a non-dual sense is the highest form of compassion. The Tibetan Buddhists are very good at spelling that out. So back to stealing, it's interesting that one of the things I mentioned that we can steal is enlightenment. We imagine that it will be mine. And I mean, that is a very powerful imagination, and before one wakes up. So the 31st patriarch, the Zen master Dai, bowed to the great master Jianqi and said, I beg the priest in his great compassion to give me the teaching of liberation. The patriarch replied, who is binding you? The patriarch, the master said, no one is binding me. The patriarch answered, then why are you seeking liberation? With these words, the master was greatly awakened. Now you can see a little bit of the in the awakening. Oh, at last I have it, whatever it is. It's well, the next step is the confusion about the meaning of the word transmission. So the master is asking for the teaching of liberation, but it's as if he's asking for liberation. And, you know, we know people, and maybe some of you know this in your own experience, who go around from teacher to teacher hoping to get zapped, you know, that some kind of transmission happens. And you know, that word transmission is interesting because it indicates there too. There's this person here and this person over here, and I'm going to transmit to that one something that I have. See, I'm going to steal that from you. You know, I want it to be mine. But that isn't what transmission means. It's rather the interpenetration, the oneness of the two. So each of these precepts there's a commentary called Bodhidharma's One Mind Precepts, and then Dogen has a commentary. And the commentary is a little short versions, little short sentences or two, are from the oneness place, from the non-dual place. So in the case of stealing, Bodhidharma says, self-nature is inconceivably wondrous in the ungraspable Dharma not arising the thought of gain is called non-stealing. And notice ungraspable. It makes no sense to try to grasp what's ungraspable. Let me get rid of this phone here. And at Shakyamuni Buddha's awakening, he didn't say, aha, I'm awake now. He said, I and the whole universe is awake. You know, it's not stealing something from myself. Oh, excuse me. The Publishers Clearinghouse telling me I've just won millions. So let's just let this finish. So this second thing of the book, the second intention of the book is really to help us develop compassion for ourselves. And the more compassion we have for ourselves, the more we have for others. So instead of a practice of being good, of following a precept, of becoming better, etc., I discover all the ways that I kill, that I lie, that I steal, etc. And so there's a discovery there, but there's also a compassionate allowing or even welcoming those places in me that I'd rather not acknowledge, and I certainly don't want you to know about them. And of course, many times they're hidden. We're so good at avoiding them that they're hidden from us as well. But you know, Buddhism is very clear that we have to go through our suffering, failures to do good, to be compassionate, etc., and not around them or behind them, or we have to go through them. Because in the Zen tradition in particular, nothing is excluded. This is one of the deepest realizations in Zen. There is no outside of the, you know, and Dogen shows us a thing that is really surprising is that enlightenment doesn't exclude delusion. If it did, we'd be making enlightenment a concept and delusion a concept, both bordered. So hot doesn't exclude cold. Hot is just hot. You know, I'm not busy comparing and contrasting it with something else. So another way this is said in Zen, this is a saying that appears in Dogen and elsewhere, which is, if you fall to the ground, you have to use the ground to get up. So if I have a stealing habit, you know, I go to the local whatever and I steal fruit and I don't need it. I'm not starving, but I steal. You know, I had a friend once who's no longer living, a very elegant, gifted woman. And she confessed to me once that she shoplifted and that it was a compulsion. And, you know, that she was really working on it. And she finally, a couple of years later, she said, I stopped, you know. But that was amazing. I mean, I've never known anybody with like gambling. It's like a compulsion. So it's, I have to use I have to find out what it feels like to steal. Why am I doing this? And of course, the big thing about the awakened state is there's no sense of lack. So one of the characteristics of the enlightened, it's a funny word in English, I think, is satisfaction. But that means freedom from any sense of lack. And so Bodhidharma's commentary and Dogen's commentary is that in the realm of oneness, there is no lack. Nothing's lacking. Everything is just as it is. In fact, everything we might discover is perfect as it is. So then, if there's no sense of lack, then stealing doesn't make any sense. You know, my left hand's taking the money and I'm trying to steal it with my right hand doesn't make any sense because this is one body here. So some of you know the Gatha of Atonement that's recited, chanted, all evil karma ever committed by me since of old on account of my beginningless greed, anger, ignorance. Now I atone for it all. And I remember it's being pointed out to me that the word atonement is at-one-ment. And to atone it for anything is to fully take it in and be it and know what it tastes like, and then you're free of it. But if I treat atonement as, well, I'm not going to do that again, you know, it's likely to come back and come back and come back. So this can be distressing, you know, to have a Zen teacher say to you, yeah, you need to learn to love your delusions, your sufferings. They're part of you. You need to embrace them, and embracing them, you're letting them out of prison, the prison of don't want to know, need to hide, etc. And with that, a lot can happen. So I'm sure many of you know the poetry of Mary Oliver, and and I'm sure most of you know this as well, that 95% of her poetry is about nature, and it's really quite beautiful and sort of redemptive. She had a father who sexually abused her when she was a child. And she's written 5 poems about this, which are incredible, and they're about her journey. So here's the first one. It's called The Kookaburras. In every heart, there is a coward and a procrastinator. In every heart, there is a god of flowers just waiting to stride out of a cloud and lift its wings. The kookaburras are a kingfisher, Australian kingfisher, pressed against the edge of their cage, asked me to open the door. Years later, I remember how I didn't do it, how instead I walked away. They had the brown eyes of soft-hearted dogs. They didn't want to do anything so extraordinary, only to fly home to their river. By now, I suppose the great darkness has covered them. As for myself, I am not yet a god of even the palest flowers. Nothing else has changed either. Someone tosses their white bones to the dung heap. The sun shines on the latch of their cage. I lie in the dark, my heart pounding. And I won't read you the ones in between, but here's the last poem. And I know it took her over a period of years, she finally wrote this poem. And I remember I had dinner, we had a mutual friend, and we had dinner and all three of us. And I had just read this poem, which is in Redbird. And I said, Mary, that's, she was so happy to hear that. She said the editors wanted to take it out of the book. And it's love, sorrow. So she's opened the cage finally, and she's allowed that little girl, who went through horrors. She's gotten closer and closer to her, and, and also knows that she has to take care of herself. So here's the ending of this journey. Love, sorrow, she is yours now, and you must take care of what has been, what has been given. Brush her hair, help her into her little coat, hold her hand, especially when crossing a street. For think, what if you should lose her? Then you would be sorrow yourself. Her drawn face, her sleeplessness would be yours. Take care, touch her forehead that she feel herself not so utterly alone, and smile that she does not altogether forget the world before the lesson. Have patience in abundance, and do not ever lie or leave her even for a moment by herself, which is to say, possibly again abandoned. She is strange, mute, difficult, sometimes unmanageable, but remember, she is a child, and amazing things can happen. And you may see, as the two of you go walking together in the morning light, how little by little she relaxes, looks about her, and begins to grow. A very touching poem. But that little girl could be our anger, greed, ignorance, our compulsion to steal, our killing, our needing to kill other people's success, or stealing attention, or whatever version. And, so anyway, that's the second part of the book. And then just to remind you all, again, if you fall to the ground, you have to use the ground to get up, or that Buddhism in general, just does not avoid, it knows that we have to go through our suffering and other people's. So this is Rumi's famous poem, The Guest House. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And that's the key here is, to allow oneself to be guided into the automatic arising of the precepts of no more, or it's not ever, forever, ever, but at this moment, no lying, non-lying. It's not appropriate. It doesn't make sense. And it's be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So they're guiding us. Each one of our so-called failings in following, as it were, a precept is a guide from beyond. And if we can welcome all of that, we are saved. So nothing's excluded in Zen, nothing, non-killing doesn't exclude killing. Not killing excludes killing. So they are opposites. So this is the third part of the book, working through, in Zen terms, explaining why being able to compassionately allow the killer, liar, stealer, is why that's a requirement for arriving at the non-dual relation to a precept. Because so there's don't kill, not killing is the opposite of killing. But non-killing transcends the two of them. So you have, and to me, that's the heart of Zen, is the transcending the opposites. It's what the non-conceptual is. So that's the second half of the book. And so let's hear from you all.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Wonderful, wonderful. And we still have most of 100 people on screen. So let's spend some time. We've got another little more than a half an hour if we'd like to use that. And Nancy is wide open for your questions or your comments. And because there are so many of us, I can't see you all. So down under on your Zoom screen, down under reactions, if you see reactions, you'll see raise hand. And if you hit that little raise hand icon, then you'll go to the front of my screen and I'll be able to call on you. If you do this, I won't see you because there are 4 screens of you. So it's like we're in a small house with 4 rooms. We're not all in the same room. So please, if you have a question for Nancy or a comment or a reaction or anything, please.
As my mother would say, don't all speak at once.
I fear that perhaps somebody might be waving their real hand and I'm not seeing them, but
yeah, go down to the bottom of the Zoom screen and look for that little round icon that says reactions below it.
It's a smiley face. Yeah. We've got Samo. Please go ahead and unmute if you would. And oh, this is Eve's group. Hi, Eve.
Hey!
I know. We're all here listening. It's part of our one-day retreat. So nice to see you, and so nice to hear you, really. So just for so many years of friendship, would you say how a person who has studied so much the works of Wittgenstein, how that person also got into working with behavioral, practical things like our Zen precepts?
That's very easy to answer. Wittgenstein thought, and I quote, that philosophy is like an illness. And it's the illness of abstraction, of generalization, and of misusing language as a result. So his way of philosophizing with a small p was he said, I have no theory to offer, just therapy. And he is the most concrete thinker I know. And so he has, and also that freeing us of the confusion and delusion and illness of philosophy ends in, for him, peace. And it's a very powerful similarity. And and it is about concrete. It's about the particulars. And I think that that's what Dogen has helped me see about Zen, is that, so much emphasis in Zen has been placed on the experience of the whole, as it were, and of the so-called absolute. And then there is the rebirth of this world that we live in, but it's a world of particulars. And so Dogen really, that's what he concentrated on, and enlightenment in its particular essence. And the same with Wittgenstein. So I don't know, Eve, if this is answering your question, but keep going if it isn't.
Well, thank you very much.
There's a book I've always wanted to write, and now I'm ready to, which is Wittgenstein in his early work, which is very sort of logical and mentions mysticism. And he says, among other things, the mystical is not how the world is, but that it is. Namely, it's not there's no sort of scientific description of it, etc. It's not how it is. And in the later work, where he learned from children what language really is, that language is behavior. I mean, I'm speaking, and this was true for Dogen, and that it's all that there's nothing, it's non-dual. I mean, there's nothing but this world we live in, and our tendency, and it's the philosopher in us, as he says, not just the professional philosopher, is to fly up and try to get a bird's eye view, and of separation and generalization and conceptualizing and so on and so forth. And that can be confusing and all kinds of things. But to come right back down into the reality in which we live is, in a sense, think about practice here, it's an act of faith, because one is giving up the kind of intellectual control over one's reality and one's relationships to others and so on and so forth. And you become part of the great unfolding. And you say, well, yeah, but wait a second, where are the handles? And there are none, but it's to discover a totally different way of being that's full of joy. And this he knew. So the title of the book will be Living and Philosophizing Without a Why, Wittgenstein and the Mystical. And I hope I live long enough to get it done.
Thank you, Roshi. Thank you, Nancy. Leon, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Roshi, for the talk. So can you talk a little bit more about Zazen and the precepts, and like what the relationship is, like how they work together, I guess is my question. And then also how that also kind of weaves into our work with our teacher. And I don't know, the thing that came to my mind in working with them is, how do you keep from falling into the dualism, and then like it being like a confessional kind of thing, like in Judaism and Christianity, where you make it like this, you're going in to sit with your teacher and you just find yourself kind of spilling your guts rather than kind of, I don't know. So I guess that got me thinking about the relationship between Zazen and the precepts and working with your teacher. So if you could please maybe say a little more about that. Thank you.
Well, as I mentioned, I think that, okay, I'm trying to think of an order here. As I mentioned at the beginning, Dogen says, in Zazen, what precept is not followed? Namely, non-dually, naturally. It just naturally flows out of Zazen. But of course, he's not talking about sitting on the cushion as a particular practice, but rather, Bernie used to talk about the state of Zazen, what we take off the cushion. And to be in that state is to be completely open to the non-dual. To be in it. But I end the book with something that really made a big impression on me, which was in the Jukai ceremony. I think what's so moving to people who go through this ceremony or people who watch it is that the parts of the ceremony where the officiant asks the recipient to be one with the Buddha. And the recipient repeats, being one with the Buddha, be one with the Dharma, being one with the Dharma, being one with the Sangha, be one, being, So there's a oneness happening in the ceremony. Be a Buddha. What? How can I be a Buddha? But that doesn't occur to anybody in the middle of the ceremony. There are people, people are moved to tears there. But interestingly, the ceremony ends with a listing of all the precepts and the question, will you maintain it? Will you maintain it? So it's as if we're back in the dual world. And Dogen, I was so happy to find this. It was just amazing to me. Let me see. I'm going to read a little bit here. I'm going to read a page, if you don't mind. The Jukai ceremony itself is an occasion on which we, even as beginners, become a Buddha. But how can we become a Buddha if we already are a Buddha? One might ask, since we don't have Buddha nature, but are Buddha nature, how does it make sense to say that we can become a Buddha? We may be Buddhas, but we don't know it. The ceremony reveals to us, and that's a word used in the ceremony, reveals to us that we are Buddhas. So those moments of being really move. Those moments of being, this is important in practice, to pay attention to those moments when we are moved by something, by beauty, by all kinds of things can move us. And it's a brief moment, or the moment when we get a joke, or have an insight. We pass by those moments quickly into the afterthought, or we just move on, but to actually pay attention to that moment where there's nothing there to grasp, those moments are, as an Advaita teacher I know and have learned a great deal from, he puts it as consciousness, which for him is the absolute, or awareness, is revealing itself to itself. In those moments, we are a Buddha. What? Nobody ever told me that before. But this is important. And so let me keep going here. The ceremony reveals to us that we are Buddhas. Having given the precepts maybe 25 or more times, I'm always struck by how moving it is to the recipient. It is an example, and by the way, those of you who have no intention of going through the Jukai ceremony, use this in whatever way. I mean, you can use it in 100 different ways. It is an example of a momentary experience out of time. But more importantly for Dogen, even though we are Buddhas, we have to actualize our Buddhahood. As Dogen puts it, although this incomparable Dharma is abundant in each person, it is not actualized without practice and not attained without realization. This means that the more we practice, the more those moments occur until eventually we start recognizing them for what they are. These moments of becoming a Buddha remain moments. They are leaps out of the conceptual, out of space-time. In addition, and here's the thing I was so happy to find, Dogen says, there are some bodhisattvas who became Buddhas countless billions and billions of times. This helps us see why actualizing a Buddha is not to be in some permanent, unchanging, timeless, absolute state, forever free of what Dogen calls our topsy-turvy everyday life. Moreover, he reminds us that the vertiginous confusions of life are limitless, unquote. Bernie Glassman, in answer to the question, what is Zen, always said Zen is life. And MUJO says, and let's face it, life is infinitely complex and ever-changing. As Wittgenstein calls it, says, it is the whole hurly-burly. So again, you see a connection between the two. In fact, everything that makes up what we call life is impermanent. And as Dogen shows us, that impermanence itself is Buddha nature. So I don't know if I'm still headed in the direction of your questions.
Yes.
Okay. But I think that might be, you know, it might be interesting to go in to see the teacher without a plan and without a need to unburden one's whatever suffering, but to go in and with nothing to say and just be open to what might happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for your question, Leon. Wonderful.
Yes, wonderful.
Wonderful. My Dharma brother, Sigmund Myoshin, you've got your hand up.
Hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for your talk.
Sigmund, I have to tell everybody, Sigmund was in my freshman studies class, I don't know how many years ago.
40 years ago.
40 years ago. It's such a treat that we meet here.
Well, hearing you speak is like being back in Sheffield House and listening to you and talking with you and sharing and learning. It's just spectacular. So thank you so much for your sharing. It means a lot. So I first off, I want to maybe offer just an appreciation, and then I do have a question. I mean, I think when you talked about the precept of non-stealing, for example, I love how you really open up the precepts and get us to consider that, well, you know, oh, stealing means more than we think it is. I mean, it's so easy to dismiss the precepts, and when you think, oh, okay, that's not my issue, or oh, that's not what I do, right? But the way you highlight non-stealing is to really show us how we do indeed steal a lot. And that was quite powerful, and it's a wonderful way to open up the precepts. So I definitely appreciate that. Here's my question, though. You know, for those of us who've taken vows and we've studied the precepts, and we've gone through Jukai, you know, you really focus on the precepts, and then, you know, the Sangha life continues, and then, you know, you have the Fusatsu ceremony where the precepts are mentioned, you know, and so you think about the precepts again. But in Sangha life, discussion of the precepts or a focus on the precepts, at least in my experience, doesn't come up all that much. And so I'm wondering, you know, because we focus on Zazen, or we focus on the path, or koan study, or whatever it is we're doing, right? So my question is, is there a practical way of making the precepts, or allowing for the precepts to become more present in the Sangha life?
Read the book.
Definitely.
I'll tell you why, because one of the things the second part of the book does is tries to explain why welcoming the liar, stealer, etc. in me is necessary for arriving at the non-version of the precept. But in getting there, I really have to deal with emptiness, suchness, zazen, blah, 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 blah. And these things that, in my experience, have never been fully clarified and brought together, which is one of the things I really wanted to do here. So I think that, in a sense, what I say at the beginning of the part 2 is, which the editor called Exploring the Precepts Through Dogen's Non-Duality, is in the second part of the book, we tried to answer these questions with some help. What is exactly oneness anyway, and what is opening? I mean, all of what's in the second part of the book, I would say, I mean, this is a wonderful question you're asking, is about Sangha life. It's about life, it's about practice, but the precepts are completely buried in there. I mean, it's we're trying to understand something about the precepts. So, you know, you've asked a really wonderful question, but I'd be very curious to have you read the book, and then let's get back and pursue this. That would be great.
That sounds great. I'm gonna definitely be reading the book. So
Okay,
absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Wonderful to see you. I can't tell you. A very wonderful poet, by the way, who's many years beyond what I remember. But I hope to touch into that more.
Thank you, Sigmund. Very nice. Lisa Gacchio, you've got your hand up, and I'm just so pleased how well represented Colorado is here today. So this is very nice. So.
Let's see. Hi. As soon as I unmute,
You got them here too. So.
Every time. Thank you so much for this talk. This was wonderful, and I am very excited about getting my hands on your book. The question I had is, there's a Dogen quote that you referred to that I hadn't heard before and was really struck by. And it's that if you fall to the ground, you must use the ground to get up. And I was wondering if you could kind of draw the dotted line between that and engaging with the precepts.
Yes. First of all, I don't think Dogen quotes uses that phrase, but it appears elsewhere in the Zen tradition, and I have no idea what its origin is. Okay, so let's stick with stealing or killing. Let's try killing. Don't kill. Not killing is the opposite of killing. And oh, that's interesting. My cats are Siamese. They've been pretty quiet, actually. So if I'm going to get to a place of, here's the not killing, where non-killing arises naturally out of me, the state of Zazen, let's say, I have to deal with this ground that I fall on all the time. And that means I have to allow the friend, whatever language you want to use. So I'm using the ground. I'm using my failure to not kill, to go beyond killing and not killing. So stick with this until help me be clear.
Failure to non-kill.
Failure to not kill. Yeah.
That just completely twisted my mind around in a great way.
Well, I mean, where do we kill? What do we kill? We might not kill other humans. I mean, it's a wonderful example that occurred to me one day. It's just to get in touch with something in us. Think about walking along a road and seeing an abandoned puppy who's probably not finished nursing. And you rescue the puppy, and think of all the feelings there and so on. And then think about the cockroach scurrying across your counter. It's a totally different relation. And if I had it handy, I would read to you this. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't have it. It's a poem of Muriel Rukeyser's called Saint Roach, and you could easily get it online. You know what? Because this is relevant to your question. I'm just going to see if I can get it right here, and I'll read it out loud. And I don't think I'm going to find it. Yeah, it's too bad. Yeah, not going to find it. Well, what I would say to you is, I'm not going to find it quickly enough, but Muriel Rukeyser, and this is a woman who traveled around. She was a great poet and traveled around the world, helping poets who were political prisoners get out of prison. And, her poetry is wonderful. But the Saint Roach is and she wrote it she came and she taught at Sarah Lawrence and had retired before I came there. And my first year there, she came and gave the commencement address. And it was at a time when Cambodia was in big trouble, and there were these brown people that were being, shunned. And, it was a very, very bad time in probably 1975 or 6. And she read this poem, and of course, a lot of people thought, oh, wow. And it's about a roach. We never knew you. We didn't know your poems. We never knew you. They taught us to flush you down, et cetera, et cetera. It's an amazing poem. And then it ends with, one day, I touched one of you. She dares to touch one of them. And you were slender, not like me. She was a big woman. And you ran away, you ran quickly, but I get to know you. It's an extraordinary poem.
Seeing, somebody put it up in the chat.
Uh-huh.
And it's long,
Yeah.
but there it is.
Yeah,
it's
right.
on my screen.
So
I do not.
So go back to your question.
Tom.
Remind us how you asked your question.
It came from the quote you had mentioned about if you fall to the ground, you must use the ground to get up, and connecting that to how we engage with the precepts.
So let me say something else about it. So let's say I'm a non-killer. Let's say don't kill is or let me pick something that's a little less, I'll go back to stealing. Don't steal. So my friend who had the compulsion to shoplift, very bad. So I've fallen to the ground, but I don't want to use the ground to get up. I want to jump right to don't steal. Okay. And it doesn't work. So I have to use the ground to get up.
The not bypassing.
Yeah, which is the point of all those Dharma talks. And then there's something that can happen here where it becomes non-stealing.